Video one in our series on best-selling author Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now, coming up right after this. Hey everyone, I'm Yoel and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So grateful to have you. And today's video is the first video in a series on best-selling author Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. Now, anybody who saw my previous series on Michael Singer's Living Untethered will know that I record the introduction and conclusion after I complete the main videos in the series. But really, this is the first video that I'm recording, chronologically speaking anyways, on Eckhart Tolle's fantastic book. So I'm very excited to be doing this. And also very excited, particularly because this is in response to a comment that was left in underneath one of the videos on YouTube, where somebody asked for more explanation on Eckhart Tolle. So it's obviously Eckhart Tolle obviously talks about very deep concepts, and I'm going to do my best to try and do it justice. But really, the best way for me to be able to do what I can to help you, the audience, is if you give me specific questions that may be bothering you. Like this viewer, for example, said that he or she, I'm not sure if it's a male or female, finds Eckhart Tolle to be somewhat confusing or complicated. And I understand that. And I'm very grateful for your feedback, especially if you're the one watching this now. But it would help me as well if you can specify some questions that you have in particular, and then I can do my best to try and address those in the video. But in the meantime, I am going to get into the book and try and discuss it in a very general way and see if I can try and do justice to Eckhart Tolle's fantastic work. Obviously, it's struck a chord with many, many people because it's a huge bestseller. This is the book I have is the 20th anniversary edition, and I'm not sure how many copies have been sold, but you can rest assured that many, many have been sold. Okay, so without further ado, there's so much I can say because, again, really chronologically, this is the first video I'm recording, but I don't want to say too much that I'll probably share in the introduction. I will remind you, as I did in the Michael Singer series, that if you do have questions, which again are obviously very welcome to leave in the feedback in the comments section below, try and write those down as we go along so that you're not kind of interrupting yourself as you're watching this video or as you're listening, as you're doing other work or whatnot. So if a question comes up, write it down. It may be something that I answer later on in the video, or if not, it's something that you can send to me later, but try and watch the whole video once before leaving a comment with any one of your questions. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to be referring to my notes, and basically, like the Michael Singer series, I'm going to break down this series by chapter. I just want to check, and again, I'm going to get into this in the introduction. I believe there's there's actually 10 chapters, which means the video series will probably be 12 videos, an introduction, conclusion, and then one video per chapter. But I have to see, because this is, very deep stuff, and maybe I'll break it down even further. But my intention is to do one video per chapter plus a conclusion as well as an introduction. Okay, so the first chapter is called You Are Not Your Mind. And the first part of this chapter starts off by explaining what Eckhart Tolle calls the greatest obstacle to enlightenment. And then there's a sort of subsection where he asks what enlightenment is. Now, I just want to say before I forget, just by seeing these words, you are not your mind, you're going to see, especially if you watched Michael Singer's, the video series that I did on Michael Singer, and if you haven't, please go back and watch that. That's in my YouTube video library. A lot of the same concepts are coming up. Okay, now Michael Singer may use different wording in many cases or has a different way of approaching the material, but ultimately they're both saying very similar things. So just the idea of you are not your mind, the idea of enlightenment, Singer does use the term enlightenment. You see these concepts coming up again and again with a lot of the spiritual teachers, whether it's Michael Singer, Eckhart Tolle, etc. So that's an amazing thing because you can see that continuity there and that consistency. Okay, so back to Tolle, he asks, what is enlightenment? Now, what Tolle says is that everyone is always looking for pleasure, fulfillment, validation, etc. on the outside. Okay, we've talked about this concept so many times, but really, where do we know that you're going to find these ideas of joy or pleasure or fulfillment? Where does that come from? The inside. Okay, you don't get validation by posting on Facebook how wonderful your children are and getting the thumb up or the smiley face or whatever. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that necessarily. Yes, no, or the other. That's for you to draw your own conclusions. It could be very dependent on the person, depends on your intention. But that's not where validation really comes from. True validation, anyways. Validation comes from the inside. You are the only validation that you need. Now, what does you mean? What are you? What is your mind? We're going to get into all that in this book, just as we did with Michael Singer. Remember, Michael Singer talked about that in his very first chapter of Living Untethered as well. Okay, so we'll get into that with Eckhart Tolle. But Tolle starts off his book by saying that finding that pleasure or validation does not come from the outside. Try as we may to look outside, it comes from the inside. Now, what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is simply your natural state of felt oneness with being. And I could already sense the viewer who left the comment about how hard it is for him or her to understand Eckhart Tolle. I could see, I'm just going to say him, okay? Forgive me if you are female. You can leave that in the comments to clarify for me. But I'm going to say him just to make it simple. I don't want to keep saying him or her. Okay, so for the viewer that did talk about the difficulty, I can see you kind of saying, like, what does that mean, the felt oneness with being? Well, give it a chance. We're going to go through it as Tolle continues to go through his book. I think you'll start to get the concepts more and more. It really has to do with surrendering, letting go of that part of identification with the mind. And when you do that, you could understand what it means to be connected to your being. Okay, but don't worry about these kind of lofty concepts or these things sound too complicated or difficult. Just give it a chance to sort of settle in and resonate. Okay, and what Tolle continues by saying, so we just said again, we said enlightenment means to simply be your natural state of felt oneness with being. And in reality, he says, there's no separation from yourself or anyone else or anything. Okay, that separation, as I alluded to now, is an illusion of the mind. The mind creates that separation between things, okay? In again, more yogi terminology, you may have seen or heard about the terminology of duality. Okay, I had a wonderful meeting with somebody recently. Forgot his name, forgive me. He's got a whole channel on non-duality. Okay, I would recommend it and link to it if I can remember. I'll try and remember by the time I finish recording this video, and if I do, I'll try and link to his video. But the whole idea of duality is a creation of the mind, because really everything is oneness, okay? Now, a state of being, Tolle says, is being ever present to the, just as I just said it, the non-dual oneness of life. I just used the term duality, there it is, okay? That presence takes a stilling of the mind. And later we'll learn how meditation has a big role in stilling of the mind. I was very excited because when I read this book, I made a little note that, I don't know if I'm going to show you the book now, but I made a little note about stilling the mind really can come across as a result of meditation. Yeah, it's actually over here. I had written the note, and then later on when I got to page 17, I saw there that he says meditation is a great way to still the mind. So it's really wonderful when you're taking notes as you read a book, and then you see exactly what you had thought of referenced later on in the same chapter. It was very gratifying. Speaking of validation, again, really, validation can come from within. But it was nice to see that I kind of had encaptured what Eckhart Tolle was saying earlier on than I had read it in his writings. But I digress. In any case, so what Tolle says is that what is the biggest obstacle to experience being? So again, as we talked about, that's identification with the mind. If I'm looking down, by the way, just as a reminder, if you haven't, or a reminder if you've seen my previous videos, and as a little note, if you haven't, I look down because I'm reading from notes that I've taken on this chapter in the Power of Now. Okay, now that obstacle, as we said, which is the identification with the mind, everyone's really doing it, right? People are, well, I shouldn't say everyone, the masters aren't, but for the most part, most people are identifying with the mind, okay? And really all that is just mental noise. That's all the mind really is presenting for us. Okay, and Tolle says, you know, there's the famous saying by how do you pronounce the name? Descartes or Descartes or however it goes, I think, therefore I am. And what Tolle says is that he was actually making the most basic of errors to equate being with thinking. In reality, being is beyond or below thinking, okay? Thinking is actually the mental noise. That's an obstacle to being. That's the irony. That's an obstacle to enlightenment. You don't want to be enslaved to that incessant thinking, Tolle says. But what happens is that we identify with the mind, and that creates this screen of concepts and labels and images and words and judgments and definitions, etc., etc. Then this creates that separateness, that duality from being, as we were talking about. And Singer, by the way, has the very same concepts where he talks about the idea of preferences, right? Likes or dislikes. It's really the same idea as Tolle, just worded in a different way. So Tolle talks about the idea of the mind coming up with these different concepts of duality. Singer talks about the mind coming up with preferences, right? What I want, what I like or dislike. Really amazing to see the themes really repeating themselves. And again, Singer also says the mind is a wonderful thing. So does Tolle. The mind is a wonderful thing so long as you're the one who's in control of the mind as opposed to the mind controlling you. So you can use that mind, okay? But don't let the mind use you. And we're going to get more into that. What does that mean? What does that mean to let go of the mind such that you can also be using it while not letting it use you? We're going to expound upon these concepts, or Tolle will, and I'll do my best to highlight them in these videos. But anyway, carrying on, what Tolle says is that the beginning of freedom is to realize that you are not the thinker. Again, remember Singer? You are not your mind. You are the conscious, witness consciousness, Singer calls it. So here too, Tolle says, you are not the thinker. You can actually watch the thinker, okay? And when you do that, you immediately enter a higher level of consciousness because you realize that there's this vast realm of intelligence that's beyond thought, as I talked about. And what does that mean to watch the thinker? It means that you can move from that continuous monologue in your head, right? You always have thoughts going on in your head, like, I can't believe that person did that to me. When am I going to eat dinner? What am I going to have for dinner? Oh, I had meatloaf yesterday. Oh, maybe I should go get a salad. Maybe I want to go out to eat. Why am I going out to eat? I don't go out enough. Well, I go out too much. Why can't I just be happy at home? Right? The mind is just chattering. That's an incessant chatter of the mind. Okay, so you can actually observe that. I'm laughing at it. I'm laughing at the mind. Tolle's going to get into that. I noted down in my notes. You can actually laugh at the thoughts of your mind, and you can do that only because you are not your mind. You are not the thinker. You're watching the thinker. And Tolle says that that voice is constantly tormenting you, right? Because your mind can really drive you nuts with those thoughts. Okay, they're going on endlessly, and you don't have any peace or any respite from it. But there is a way to have. But there is a way to have peace and respite from it, and that's to watch what's happening in the mind to a point where you can even laugh at it. You can really have fun with it, as it were. Okay, so that's the good news. You can free yourself by constantly paying attention to it, by observing the thoughts of your mind. And don't, just like Singer says, don't judge it. You know, Singer says at one point in his book, don't you dare criticize these thoughts or anything like that. You're the one that created them in the first place, right? Through your conditioning, your upbringing, and all that, all those experiences. Don't criticize or condemn or judge yourself for it. Just observe it, Tolle says. And as you do that, you're experiencing that deeper self, the one behind the thoughts or underneath the thoughts. And as you do that, Tolle says, you can know how well you're doing it, because if joy is just kind of springing up from doing that, from observing the mind, as it were, then you know you're doing a pretty good job of observing yourself when you have that joy just springing up naturally, because that is your natural state. Again, a callback to Singer. I'll probably be doing this a lot because it's so exciting to see the two concepts really intersecting here. It's amazing how similar Singer and Tolle are. Both of them are huge bestsellers. There's a reason they resonate with so many people. I wonder if the world, the fans of Tolle and Singer who have bought their books, who have read their books, I wonder if there's anybody out there who only knows about Tolle, doesn't know about Singer, only knows about Singer and not Tolle. Maybe now, in small part because of my videos, people will realize the overlap. But if you like Tolle and you like Singer, there's a good reason for that, because really they have very, very similar messages, just used in different words to teach them. Okay. Now, continuing on with Tolle, as you start watching the thinker, you can direct the focus of your attention into the now, okay? By being intensely conscious of the present moment. This is the essence of presence. This is meditation, as I talked about earlier, I was going to allude to. Being intensely conscious of presence, of being present, you can do that by meditating on that presence, on that consciousness of being present. And that helps you really focus on watching the thinker and not being of the thinker, not being of your mind. You're watching the mind's thoughts. Oh, and I forgot to mention, why is this a kind of a callback to Singer? Because Michael Singer, remember, he talks about the Shakti, the natural energy flow, the natural flow of love that's within us. That's always there, but it gets obstructed and hindered by the mind and emotions, as we're going to get into. And that's what Tolle says. As you become more present and you observe the mind's thoughts, you're getting more to that state of joy that's naturally springing up from within. Okay, Singer talks about that natural state, the natural energy. Tolle talks about the natural energy within. And that's why we said in the beginning, by the way, that you don't need to look outside for joy or pleasure or validation. That's always naturally from within. Okay, that's a bit of a kind of callback to that. Okay, Tolle doesn't say that in the book, but I am. Tolle starts off by saying you don't need outside validation. And what he says now about noticing and being present and how joy is naturally springing up from it, that's an allusion back to what he was saying in the beginning of the chapter, which is that, again, you don't have to look for outside for validation or joy. That's right in those reservoirs within you. And by the way, why is it that we have this compulsive need to think? Okay, the reason is because the mind thinks that it needs that in order to survive, right? It has to create that false sense of self, Tolle says, in order to allow it to feel safe. But as you learn to let go of that and start observing what the mind is doing and you start seeing that there's joy below the surface, the mind is actually hindering, not helping you, you're going to start to be able to let go of that more and more. Okay, so that the mind, who thinks it's protecting you, and again, the mind is a great thing. Nobody's saying the mind isn't there to be used, but the mind that's there to use you and who thinks it's protecting you, that is something that you can learn to let go of, or as Singer would say, surrender. And in enlightenment, Tolle says, you start to use your mind when it's needed, but in a much more focused and effective way. Okay? Again, the mind's not using you, you're using the mind when it's needed and in a focused and effective way. Singer talks about that as well. Okay? You stop interacting with the world, you do, but you're doing it in a conscious way. You're doing it as you're present. And again, just like Singer, who talks about the three-ring circus, if you remember from the Singer series, there's there's the outside world, thoughts and emotions. We're here too. Now Tolle already starts to talk about emotions. And Tolle says the more you're identified with your thinking, if you get into your preferences, right, your likes and your dislikes, the judgments, interpretations, the stronger the emotional energy is going to be. Okay, and Tolle also says, just as an example, people who carry a lot of anger inside of them, okay, and they're not aware of it, and they don't express it, they're more likely to be attacked verbally or even physically by other angry people, often for no apparent reason. They have a strong emanation of anger that certain people pick up on subliminally, and that triggers their own latent anger. Very interesting. Okay, you're not even aware of it, but when you have these strong identifications with these feelings of anger that Tolle uses as an example, you can even be the subject of I almost said angorous, an angry attack without even knowing why, without any apparent reason. That's how powerful or emotionally charged these emotions can be if you're overly identified. Tolle doesn't say overly, if you are identified with these emotions. Okay, so we had thoughts that you're identified with and even emotions. And sometimes, Tolle says, your thoughts and emotions will conflict. And if that happens, you can trust that your emotions are telling you the true feeling, right? How many times have you ever had it? It's easier when you have a conversation with someone else, okay? Forget about trying to see it within you, although that's why we have therapists too, who can help, good ones who can help point that out. You ever had a conversation with someone and he or she, but in this case, he's telling you, oh, I feel fine, I feel great. But you see he's kind of like seething underneath. You know he doesn't really feel what he says to be that he's feeling. And he really could believe it. His mind could be telling him he feels fine. But you can notice that emotion. You can notice that energy inside of it. So when that happens, look for the emotional charge as really telling you how you feel, okay? And it's really about you. I just use another person as an example because sometimes, like I said, it's easier to see it in other people, unfortunately. But if you analyze yourself, and you find you have that sort of conflict between your thoughts and your emotions, how you're feeling emotionally is going to sort of present the real part of you. And I know in therapy for me also, a lot of times I'll have a strong emotion to something and my therapist will always pick up on that and say, what's that feeling you're having now? And when I start analyzing it, even though I'm analyzing it from the mind, okay, so leave that aside for now. That's a question, right? Because really Tolle says you can't solve problems from the mind because the mind is really the source of problems. But in the context of therapy and from a standpoint of trying to understand your emotions, I think it could be a useful tool. Remember, Tolle himself says you can use the mind as long as it's not using you. Big digression. I was kind of answering a question I had on my own, but the point is that when you start to analyze those emotions, even though you may say one thing, those emotions could tell you a different story than what your mind thoughts and what you're actually verbalizing. And Tolle says, by the way, make it a habit to ask yourself, what's going inside of me at this moment? And that question will point you to the right direction. I try to do that a lot. Okay, I'm always asking, what is happening inside of me? What is that sensation? What is that emotion telling me? Great exercise, and Tolle recommends it here. Be mindful also. Be mindful. It's an ironic expression, but your emotions want to take you over. And oftentimes, actually, Tolle says they usually succeed unless you have enough presence. Okay? Because you can easily get pulled into that unconscious identification with the emotion through lack of presence. And that's normal because it's normal for that emotion to temporarily become you, Tolle puts in quotations. By dwelling mentally on the situation, event, or person that is the perceived cause of the emotion, the thought feeds energy to the emotion, which in turn energizes the thought pattern, and so on and so forth. It's like an endless loop. And remember what Singer talked about, the three-ring circus. Tolle's talking about it too, without calling it a three-ring circus. But you have the thoughts energizing emotions, energizing thoughts, and it's a constant loop. Same idea. Now, Tolle anticipates a question you may have. What about positive emotions like joy or love? So again, I alluded to this, just like Singer calls it Shakti. So what Tolle says here is that usually such moments of love or joy are short-lived because the mind quickly resumes its noise-making activity that we call thinking. So love, joy, and peace cannot flourish until you have freed yourself from the mind dominance. Okay? But those things, love and joy, are not what, Tolle says, are not what I would call emotions. They lie beyond emotions on a much deeper level. So you need to become fully conscious of your emotions and be able to feel them before you can feel that which lies beyond them. Okay? Pleasure is always derived from something outside of you, whereas joy arises from within. The very thing that gives you pleasure today will give you pain tomorrow, or it will leave you. So its absence will give you pain. But love, real love, doesn't make you suffer like that. Why is that? Because real love or real joy is not an emotion. It lies beyond that or below it. Okay? And what I would say is if Singer was reading this book, he would say, yes, that's the Shakti that I'm talking about, the natural love and energy. But when you're involving it with emotion or you're involving the love or joy with thought, then there is going to be that kind of yin and yang. Tolle doesn't say that, but that's what I'm saying. There is that kind of counter, that polarized opposite, right? And we know, right? You could have the most loving relationship with someone one day, and then the next day, figuratively speaking, but it can be the next day, or at least seemingly, you can turn into bitter rivals and enemies, unfortunately, right? There's that opposite polarization. That's not real or true love. That's love, so to speak, identified with the mind, identified with emotions. But finding that real joy is when you're able to let go of that, of the mind's thoughts, and let go of the emotions and tap into being, as we talked about from the beginning of the chapter. Now, what Tolle continues to say is that don't seek to become free of desire or achieve enlightenment. Just be present. Be there as an observer of the mind. Again, just to notice it, be aware of it. Don't hang out a shingle and call yourself enlightened. Don't try to be spiritual. Singer talks about it in your meditation practices. Don't look for this spiritual awakening or anything like that. Tolle says the same thing. Just focus on being present, being aware. You can practice that in meditation, okay? As an example, just focus on being aware. And just to end off the chapter, Tolle says there are two levels to your pain. The pain that you create now and the pain from the past that still lives on in your mind and body. Okay, remember Singer would call that a samskara if you watch the Singer videos, right? The samskara, right? How you were conditioned, what you've collected, the bad experiences that you've collected in the past. You're storing that in your body. Tolle says the same thing. He doesn't use the term samskara, but he says the pain from the past that lives on in your mind and body. One is that you're creating pain now. You're identifying with your mind or emotions. You're creating that pain, and then you're storing it, as a samskara singer would say. And Tolle says, you're storing that pain, okay? You're storing that pain of the past that lives on in the mind and the body. Amazing how much overlap there is. And what Tolle says is ceasing to create pain in the present and dissolving past pain. Remember Singer, right? Learning how to dissolve those samskaras, okay? To break free, to those T-pipe fittings, those blockages, learning how to release those blockages. So Tolle says the same thing, ceasing to create pain in the present and dissolving that past pain. That's what Tolle wants to help us get to, that point of ceasing to create pain in the present and dissolving the past pain. And what Tolle says is that that's what I want to talk about now. No pun intended, power of now. Maybe pun is intended. And that's how Tolle ends off chapter 1. Interestingly, using the word now. I love that. Never noticed that until now. Anyway, so that concludes this chapter. Some very deep concepts. Hang in there. If you're still finding yourself confused, you can send me questions for sure. But a lot of these concepts are going to continue to become clear, just like with Singer. I hope that you found a lot of those concepts clear with time. If not, please leave me specific questions and I'll do my best to address them, maybe as a kind of Q&A, because what I'm doing in these videos is I'm kind of trying to highlight different parts of the chapters of Tolle's book. Okay, I'm not really answering specific questions of viewers, but I'm trying to give a synopsis of his book. I should mention, by the way, you should buy the book, The Power of Now. I'm going to remember, hopefully, to link that in the description below. So you should buy the book as well and read it on your own. But these videos are an attempt to kind of give those synopses. But in terms of questions that you may have, things that you don't understand, it will be very helpful to me if you can specify what it is that you don't understand. And I'll be very happy to do my best to answer. By the way, if I don't know, I'll say, I don't know. I don't know the answer, if that's the case. Or I'll check with somebody who's I feel is very, very enlightened and see if he or she has a response for me that I could pass on to you, the viewer. But it's much easier, I would say, much more effective or efficient or effective for you to specify questions that you have, as opposed to just saying generally, I don't understand. If you're not able to do that, that's okay. Again, the fact that one of you left that feedback about not understanding Tolle is the reason why I started doing this video series. And hopefully with time, it will become clear. Even if you can't kind of articulate the question that you have, hopefully I'll find a way, to touch upon it, even if it's not intentional, but to find a way to touch upon it in my videos, and that will become helpful to you. Okay, so generally speaking, I hope you found that video to be enlightening, informative, maybe entertaining too, I don't know. And don't forget to leave feedback. Any sort of feedback, as I said, is welcome. Your comments are always welcome. And I also want to highlight that I'm very appreciative of those who have subscribed. Again, the amount of subscribers continues to increase. It's so gratifying to see that. So if you've subscribed already, thank you so much. If you haven't yet, I would be very grateful if you did. Quickly subscribe. It takes a second to subscribe. You're definitely helping me. There's no doubt about that, but you're also helping yourself to not miss a future video. And if you have any video ideas or suggestions, I will take that under advisement. I do my best to try and produce videos. Just bear in mind that it does take a lot of time and effort, which is another reason why I'm always grateful for subscribers, because it gives me that momentum to keep doing this. Again, not that I need outside validation, but in YouTube language, assuming you're watching this on YouTube, it definitely helps me get my message out there and encourages me to keep on producing these videos. Although I definitely am getting that validation from within. It's a wonderful thing to be doing these videos. I'm learning right along, hopefully with you as well. I'm certainly learning by doing these videos. Thank you as always for visiting my channel. And as always, I am very grateful that you did. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you at the next video. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. I've got plenty more in my videos library. If there's a topic you'd like me to discuss, feel free to leave that in the comments and I'll do my best to address it. If you can like the video, I'd be very grateful. As well, if you subscribed, you'd be helping me out. You'd also be helping yourself out to not miss a future video. Thanks so much. Have a great day.